Hello, what is up, everybody? It is WoW podcast time. Hacked, what's going on?
Oh, not much.
So this is the long-awaited, much talked about, delayed reaction to Liquid Max interviewing Ion Hazzikostas. I almost said Ion because I just constantly call him Ion. But he's the game director for WoW. This came out probably 4 weeks ago, about a month ago. A lot has changed in the beta, but a lot of the like high level concepts that they talk about and the questions that Max asks are not something that's going to change from beta build to beta build. It's kind of just larger picture type stuff and state of the game type stuff. So still relevant. We're going to go through, kind of react to each question, probably in the middle of some of the questions. But I'm really excited. I really liked this interview as someone who doesn't care about like lore type stuff, and it's all gameplay and like kind of rating Mythic Plus related.
Yeah, it was really well done for sure.
Yeah. People who've been watching know secrets that we're big Max fans here. I think he's gotten a lot better to it at doing the interview thing since he started doing the like roundtables for the talent trees. And this is the first time they've talked, and he'll touch on it here when we start it up. But yeah, unless there's anything you want to say, let's just jump right on in and start watching this interview.
Long enough.
Yeah. Yo, what up, Rad? We're about to start. You came just in time. Hi, cheat. All right, here we go.
We are here live with Ian. First time we're actually meeting. I don't think we've ever actually spoken before. I know you mentioned in a couple other interviews you had seen some of my videos and talked about it with like the AMZ thing, which was pretty funny.
I love the first thing he brings up is the AMZ thing.
Listener, first time caller.
I'm not getting.
Thank you for giving us the ammunition to make.
You're not getting audio?
Yeah.
Oh, because hey, something went wrong. We couldn't stream the sound from your application. I probably should have tested that before I went live on Discord. I've been having this problem trying to stream browser sources.
On my end.
No, it's definitely on my end. I've been having this problem. I need to turn this up. I can turn that up a little bit. Yeah. So do you want to just try to watch together and then you can just pause when I pause, and we'll just do it that way since I don't want to troubleshoot sound.
Yeah, can you shoot me a link?
Yeah. Share. What the fuck is that? I've never seen that share link before. All right. Sending you the linkage.
The link. Alrighty.
Not sure what I changed. I didn't change anything for Hack's mic. Maybe Hacked is just speaking more clearly. He hasn't been hitting the bottle as hard.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
But anyway, yeah. So we're back in. I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1.
Some changes we wanted to make. It's always appreciated.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. They're going to be mad about that, but that's fine. Okay. But yeah. So
yeah. First thing he brings up AMZ nerf.
Because we have like a pretty limited amount of time. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is actually season 4. So I think, first of all, the community loves it. At best, I think it's a great new idea that can, revolutionize the end of expansion's gameplay. Very worst, honestly, is just objectively better than a super long season 3. So basically, what are some of your thoughts about season 4? And if you've had any time during Dragonflight to think about maybe if it could be brought back or improved upon?
Fucking great question.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, thank you for those thoughts and those reactions. I think it's been overall super happy with how it's played out. Definitely, some bumps the first week, especially with scaling issues.
Yeah, I do want to touch on that. We've talked about it in our Mythic Plus episode. First of all, I think what Max said is true. I think it's been pretty well received in general, season 4.
I think overall.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. But with bringing back legacy dungeons, clearly there were some issues, scaling issues, and I really still just want to hammer home that it's not going to be fun every season when we have 4 new legacy dungeons, that we're going to have scaling issues, and it's going to be potentially unplayable for the first couple weeks.
So Dratnos and Tettles actually just recently did a video, and Dratnos is just spitting bars. Same shit I've been saying, like literally just, he's like, I mean, I'm done talking about it, but you know, like we know my stance on it.
Yeah.
I still disagree with it, but I guess it is what it is.
Yep.
Like
we're just going to have to deal with it, I guess. But anyway, all right.
It could go great. Who knows?
We'll see. Maybe.
Really used that tech at this scale before, so we had to work out some of the kinks in the system there. But I think we went into this hoping that it would play out largely the way it had, and if it did, that this could become something that we go to in the future at the very end of an expansion. Just kind of in those last few months, everyone knows the next expansion's on the horizon. You finish the story, you finish the current expansion's content. It's just kind of a remix and a chance to revisit kind of the greatest hits of the expansion as a whole. Tuning has been definitely something we've been looking at. Like I think now that people have more gear, pretty happy with where that's landed. And we definitely heard a lot of feedback, especially the first couple of weeks, from like Hall of Fame and cutting edge, but not guilds like your guild. That it felt too much like reprogression, and it's like then we go look at logs and realize like, look.
What do you think about the Mythic Plus was more egregious than I think the raid difficulty, even though he's kind of touching on the Mythic raiding difficulty.
Well, and he's also about to fucking just spit a hard bar, which is I fucking love this part in the interview. He's just like,
well, I'll let it go past, and then we can react to it.
You guys wiped like 5 times, then killed the boss. Like that's not really progression, but I get it, right? Like it feels like you've already learned this fight. It feels like you've already killed the boss.
But yeah, so I don't think that the raid thing, like, you progress the affixes and how they deal with the fight. You never actually reprogress the fight. And even the fights that we had like trouble on, that was like, oh, this affix really sucks. And like you said, and this is on a mythic level even. I'm just us at a heroic level. It's like it's the same thing. We'll wipe like 5 times till we figure out how to deal with the soaks on Sire, right?
Right.
But like that's not progression. It's not the same.
Yeah, I'd be curious where
what
that.
Were you getting at?
I just like, I want to know where that specific feedback was coming from, like, because I didn't remember seeing really anywhere of people complaining about raid difficulty even at the mythic level. Like maybe a little bit.
You're not gonna see like the low tier cutting edge guilds.
Yeah, I guess
about
that's
it
true.
On the platform that they don't have.
Yeah,
so it was never like a high end thing. It was
I more meant even just like flipping through Reddit and stuff, just like randos, just saying stuff. But the Mythic Plus stuff was way more egregious, and that's I think where the scaling tech, they're just gonna have to really make sure it's locked in.
Yeah, definitely, because I mean I'm not dealing with this every single season when I want the new dungeons anyway.
Yeah,
like it's already worse than I think it should be, so you're just gonna make it even worse with
right. All right, starting.
We expect to just go in and win, but we want there to be a little bit of a challenge. So I think overall it's played out pretty much the way we wanted to.
All right, great, yeah, and some other things that were added during season 4 outside of the actual gameplay element of faded affixes and raids. Were a lot of the like loot acquisition systems. So you had to create a few new unique ones because of the way the raids would be rotating. But I kind of wanted to ask you about them. So like Dinar and the upgrade essences from Heroic and Mythic, like I said, I think they're excellent.
Yes.
Is there a chance that we could actually see a truncated version of this in a regular season that would maybe help with loot targeting? So an idea for that is like currently someone could do an entire Mythic Sanctum raid every week and never see a Jathis maybe. It obviously would have to be much less, but like what could that look like?
So before Ian answers, like I think we're both on the same page. Like deterministic loot is cool, good. Everybody is happy, especially when it's not. I think it's pretty easy for them to find a good balance because even if it's exceptionally slow, it's still better than what we have now.
It's something, yeah, and I don't think the Dinar system is the answer, obviously, because gear is not going to work like this every season. This is like we need to get our gear now. We've already done this shit. Like,
Right.
you don't want this to be the system in place for a new season, but I think the idea can be worked upon to make it fit into those like regular seasons.
Oh, I didn't realize Rad had never watched this interview. It's a great interview, Rad.
Oh yeah, Max is asking some bangers.
Yeah. All right, let's listen to Ian's answer.
I think something like this for sure. I think kind of like the season, the season structure itself, we see this as a time for experimentation, and experiments aren't necessarily going to be carried forward in their exact form, but the idea of like anti-RNG backstops and some feeling of security and guarantee that you will eventually get that chase best in slot item you want feels like a useful thing for us to explore. I mean, the dinar system, I think, in terms of how upfront it is and how quickly you're getting some things, that is probably way more accelerated than we would ever do in a regular news season. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is like the 3-week rotation means that you just get fewer shots at getting these items. Also, like psychologically, most of these are items that you already had. Like, while it was relevant, you got your Jathis, you got your Sylvanas daggers, whatever else, and so you're having to re-earn them.
Except people didn't, which was
right.
The issue.
I was also going to say if they're bringing back like I don't know if we'll get it for Mythic Plus, we probably won't, but like, you're bringing content back into the game at a current item level. Like, it's not only did you may or may not have already got it, but like you need it for upgrades now. You can't just like not allow people to get upgrades even if they already had it when it was relevant. It's relevant again. You need to have like a way to get it in a timely manner.
And I think like especially now with the current season, and that's what he's getting at, like you only get a shot at it every 3 weeks. So like that's kind of the point with like this season. So if they do this again, then the dinar system is perfect. I think the dinar system works perfectly for this like current iteration.
Yeah.
If they do like a end of the expansion season like this again for Dragonflight, I would expect pretty much the current dinar system in its state that it's in now, except maybe make it easier for alts. It's just
and to Cheat's point, like getting your BIS weapon when weapons are so important, like second to last week of progression, like that's just brutal. And then like I got one on my pally.
I mean,
granted,
second
LFR.
to last week progression is a little different, like but that also depends on the guild you're in. Like, what is your progression thing? Are we talking 4 weeks, 10 weeks? If it's 4 weeks, then
that's fine.
Okay, if you didn't get the weapon in 4 weeks, that's fine. Like, but 10 weeks, yeah, that's rough.
Yeah, for sure. All right, and on we go.
I think it would, to some extent, I think more than some extent, I think it would diminish the feeling of chasing after that like real trophy item if just week 3 or week 4 of a brand new tier, maybe even before you like kill the boss that dropped it on a specific difficulty, everyone could just walk in and get their item. But yeah, like
Rad, to Ian's point, it would be much slower than what it is now with the dinar system.
Ups and downs, and being excited about a loot jackpot has value, but feeling like you could do all the right things but never get it is definitely a bummer. We want to see what we can do about that going forward.
Sweet, yeah. And I think also you're going to kind of have a little bit of that reintegrated into every season going forward as well with like the new Mythic Plus pool, right? Like part of you're doing a bunch of new Mythic Plus dungeons. You're also going to see a bunch of new, potentially best in slot or very interesting trinkets and things to try. So you're going to have a lot of more loot to kind of go around.
Exactly.
Okay, so then another thing, that's it about Season 4. I kind of just wanted to talk to you about like current raid accessibility in WoW. So I've heard you speak a lot about, like people always ask about 10 mans and stuff. And I think I actually really agree with like 20 mans in WoW with how many specs there are and how vast and variable the different types of combat styles and also the ways that specs deal with that exists. I think 20 man is excellent. But I think there are a lot of things in the game where maybe the barrier of entry could be questioned at that point. So I think the first one I would want to talk about is actually the Mythic Raid lockout currently. So I think this exists where a lot of guilds, let's just say they want to do prototype Pantheon, and they're looking. There's a guild raid. They don't want to cancel the raid. They need 2 people. Well, it's gonna be really hard for someone to sign up for that group. Maybe if they really want loot from Skolex and Vigilant Guardian, and they're like, I don't want to get myself locked into this group's raid if I'm not going to continue or if we don't kill it. Basically, what I'm asking is, do you think maybe the Mythic Lockout is outdated in 2022, and it would maybe help a thriving pug system of more raids being able to
Gonna
happen
stop
at the
here real
20
quick.
size?
So, for those who haven't done Mythic in a long time, the way that the lockout currently works is if you join at a boss, all the prior bosses are basically unlootable for you. Unlike,
yeah, you have to accept that group's lockout
Right.
before, you know, as you enter it.
yeah, so you can't have individual lockouts. In the past, I think Blizzard has done this to try to stop like splits and stuff, and like acceleration of gear acquisition for Mythic guilds, which they're just doing degenerate shit anyway. So I do think Max like fucked up a little bit on this question and started talking about pugs, and they kind of like spin off
Yeah,
into
he meant-
LFR.
Yeah.
But he meant like a single person pugging into a guild group in like, you know, your typical Mythic guild that has somebody who can't make it for work reasons. The
And,
like,
and not even for that person that's pugging in, but for the guild itself,
right,
you know, they're not going to get that person to pug in.
right. Instead of one person getting an advantageous lockout, now 19 people can't raid that week. Like if you wanted to even say that it's an advantageous lockout because you can spread it around or sell it or whatever. So I do think he phrased the question in a way that made it seem like these just like random full 20-man pugs being accessible, when in reality it's the reason you would fix this lockout is for the 20-man guild that is down a guy for the night.
For the mutineers.
Yeah, right. Yeah, when we were fighting the attendance boss.
Yeah.
Still consider the true raid ID the original raid lockout type and have trouble considering personal lockouts the same, even though it's been the norm since WoD. Yeah. It's just, I think at this point in the game, like any reasoning to stop something due to Mythic guilds and like gear acquisition, they just need to give up. Like no matter what system they put in, these top end guilds are gonna find a way to game it and make it the best possible way for them to acquire loot, right? So I think they just need to do what's best for the majority of players. And we'll listen to Ian's answer, because he does make a couple decent points, but it still
There's a
doesn't.
couple really good points, but it doesn't hit the nail like what the question actually was supposed to mean. So I mean, just when you think about it, if you have 18 people and your guild wants to do Mythic, the reason it's an issue is that you're not, and say you guys are 3 Mythic bosses in, no one is going to join you on the 4th boss, because even if you don't kill it, or you kill that boss and then you don't kill the next, now that those people that pug in are locked to the 4 first bosses of that raid, so they're not going to do that to themselves.
Right.
So they're just never going to pug in. They want a fresh Mythic lockout every time, and even that's dangerous, because if you kill the first boss with a group that can't kill the second, now you're fucked. You're only killing that one Mythic boss per, you know, that week. You have no way around it. But that's not even really the issue. It's the issue on the guild side that
Yep.
you're never going to get anybody there, so you're just done raiding for the week if
Yep.
somebody can't show.
Yeah, going and Rad brought up the point about the loot thing. Yeah, it would be more than a month of like consistent clears, right? You'd have to do like
Definitely.
weeks and weeks of clears to get a piece, or like shards of a piece, and eventually you craft it, or whatever, you know, currency they want to put in. Like that is pretty, I think, understood, that like the gear acquisition would be very slow in a system during a normal season.
Definitely. And we kind of talked about it in a previous episode, I think, when we were talking about the dinars and how to carry that forward somehow.
Mhm.
I think it could just be a shard system, like how you get the shards per boss. And I think that it should be the same thing, and you decide to turn it into a token to buy a piece, or you hang on to it to upgrade a piece that you already have with it to like heroic level. and you just do that in the way of like normal gives 1 shard per boss, heroic gives 3, mythic gives 5. So
Right.
you just
All right. Gonna hit play and listen to Ian answer the mythic lockout question.
So what I'm hearing is you want to do more splits, mythic splits, more mount sales.
Now,
All of that.
this is
No?
something that always gets brought up to me, that this would honestly be something I dread about it, but I honestly think a lot of stuff that is a side effect where what we do is more crazy that sounds miserable, I think it could be potentially much better for a lot of other people in the game.
Correct.
So it could be. So I think when you talk about pugs, for sure, the rigid lockout system for Mythic is inconvenient for pugs, but I think at its core, Mythic raid difficulty isn't really meant for pugs. People will pug it later on in the season for sure, especially on bigger servers. Certainly, in season 4 like this, where the fights are much better known, the tuning's more forgiving, sure. But it's one of those things where like the lockout is an example of a little bit of healthy friction. We talk about, friction that can have social benefits, like, stuff that was removed when we added.
I'm gonna pause real quick. The last
so
time he used
true.
The last time also he used the healthy friction term is when they were talking about soul binds and picking.
Soul binds,
That,
the covenants.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then he was wrong, but this is actually true for how he's answering the question. Because he misunderstands the phrasing of the question. So the question he's answering isn't the one Max was trying to ask.
Right.
That being said, Ian is answering the question that he heard. Fucking, it's banger. He's right for sure. Like,
yeah,
for a pug situation, it shouldn't really be that accessible.
It's not meant to
makes
be,
you
right?
Stick it out. Yeah, like you do. If you do join a mythic pug, you need to stick it out because it is what it is. Like if you don't, then you're not killing any other mythic bosses. But at least if you stick it out, there's a chance.
Right.
That should be there. I agree with that. But
yeah, all right. Hit play.
Your Dungeon Finder back in the day. This is one of those examples in that joining a mythic raid is a little bit of a commitment. And I could argue that there's an upside for pugs as well, which is that, if you're doing a Mythic Nathria pug, kill Shriekwing, and then suddenly, things aren't going great on Altamore, it's a great reason not to bail on that group. It's a great reason to not have a quarter of the group say, "No, these guys don't get it. I'm out. I'm going to find another group," because you're locked for the week. You're together with them.
You have to figure it out.
Yeah, and like that, I think that actually it encourages somewhat stronger social bonds, reliance on others. At the same time, I get it if you just want to jump in and get one boss, but I think the downsides to the overall Mythic ecosystem, if we just removed that lockout, made them flex, would outweigh the upsides. And there's a reason why like normal and heroic are designed to be much more inherently flexible in structure, pug friendly. That's why those work that way. That's why Mythic still works the old way.
Okay, cool. So no plans to change that. And yeah, the split thing, the split thing would definitely be a very
I'm gonna pause.
side.
So yeah, I mean the question that Ian answered, to your point, Hacked, is like he's right. But I would also say, in terms of like building a community and sticking it out, to answer the question that Max asked him, like that's a great way. You're a guild of 19, you've got some attendance issues, or you're a guild of 18, you find 2 good pugs. Maybe now you have 2 new guildies, especially with how it's server locked until the Hall of Fame fills up, which is a whole nother issue in itself. But like you have potential to build community by being a guild with the roster boss, to Cheat's point, that can then find people that maybe need a guild or want to do mythic raiding.
Yeah, and I still think that even the question that Max was actually asking, I think this is still a decent answer ish. So the thing is with it is it's kind of a double-edged sword, because he's right. It does, even on the guild side, you don't want that one person to be like, okay, these guys don't get it, I'm moving on. You want them to stick with you, and the Mythic Lockout does force that. But on the other end, you're not gonna ever get that one person because they're just not gonna join, because the Mythic Lockout is so restrictive. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where there's really kind of a shit sandwich.
So let me ask you this question then.
So it's not I mean, removing it doesn't necessarily solve that. Keeping it in obviously isn't going to solve anything.
So big disclaimer, not a dev, right? Never made a game.
Yeah.
But like, so there's already flags in raids when you're basically a majority guild group that your run is flagged as like a guild run for like achievement purposes. So what if you just had two different mythic types of mythic lockouts? If you're in a majority guild group, then it's the current lockout style where you're stuck with that group if you pug. And then if it's a majority pugs, it's just like a flex lockout, like how normal and heroic are. Like, couldn't that be a solution to this problem to an extent?
I think that causes other problems though. Because then you're gonna, you know what happens there? I mean, this is a high end thing, but that's funny to think about. You know what happens there is Liquid disbands, and they just run splits guildless.
Yeah,
Yeah, they run splits guildless the entire time.
I guess that's
You know,
true. Yeah.
like, and I think that maybe becomes a thing that like most, especially any guild that is having that issue with the roster, because it doesn't solve it on their end, right? Like that doesn't solve anything for the guilds. I don't think anything needs to be solved for the pugs. I think I agree with Ian there that it's not really made for pugs. We don't need to make it more accessible for pug groups.
Right.
We need to make it more accessible for the guild that only has 19 people, or the guild that has 20 people, but you know they're fucked if one person doesn't show up. So I don't know that that fixes anything. That's like, it's a really hard thing to fix. I don't think there's like, I don't really have any ideas.
Let me
a double-edged sword.
I'm gonna torpedo my own point. If it was a flex lockout, imagine you clear however many bosses there are, 11, clear 10 of 11, and the pug drops to steal your lockout to sell it. Because, and like, can you like imagine people dropping out of like guild runs that are in like semi-decent guilds that just need a fill? And like somebody just like takes, not that they would steal the lockout, but like they just drop to take the flex lockout and then like go sell it for like millions of gold for like, oh, that's, you know, last boss mythic lockout.
That's the thing. Is that possible? Or if it's a guild lockout, is it tied to, like, can a pug that, you know, say a guild group does pug one person and they drop, can they steal that lockout from the guild?
I don't know, to be honest, if that's possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Because I remember back in the day, I remember when I think it happened to Limit pre like Liquid days where like they were doing splits and then somebody like refused to leave their raid and like basically held the lockout hostage for like an hour or two.
Yeah, I know things like that have happened, but I wonder if it can happen to that extent.
I wonder if Blizzard's made
what
changes.
you were just saying is you could just duplicate lockouts in a flex system.
Right.
Like you could just leave and just kind of make, I mean, everybody could disband and then you have 20
lockouts to sell.
11.
Yeah, right.
20 lockouts to sell. Yeah.
For flex lockouts, the player has to kill a boss first in order to actually obtain it.
Right.
I'm saying they clear 10 of 11 and then take the lockout and go sell it and leave you at 19. But either way, another problem.
For flex lockouts, like as they would exist or how they exist right now?
I think it means for normal and heroic.
I guess that's not a, because that's not a flex lockout.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think there's some good points there, and you know, I'm all for the like community building and get a guild and all that stuff, but it is really hard to find 20 players who consistently show up for Mythic. Since the roster size is not flex.
At the high end, probably not, because you have guilds below you, but like when you're just a
working class,
casual,
blue collar,
edge,
WoW players.
Like, rough. Yeah.
All right, on we go.
Side effect from that, like the absolute terror of potentially seeing like Scott message and be like, okay, everyone show up tomorrow. We're going to be boosting Mythic Jailer for like 12 hours. Something. I mean, oh my lord, would that be bad? Okay, so I agree with that. Another thing, just along the lines of accessibility. So in BFA, you guys came out with the Hall of Fame with the whole like Horde versus Alliance thing in that expansion. And it became the trigger for cross-realm being available. So the game has seen multiple additions recently to make the game more accessible, so cross-faction being a major one, and then also with the region-wide auction house. Is there any possibility we could get cross-realm at the beginning or earlier in the season in Dragonflight now that the Hall of Fame is less relevant?
Yeah, I think it's like I don't think we're likely to right from the very beginning that we're moving in that direction. We did it for Sepulcher before the Hall of Fame was full. I think it's likely we're going to repeat that again for
Good.
Vault going forward. In general, the game as a whole, I think, is moving at tearing down server boundaries. We want to make more and more things cross server. I think we recognize, like 15 years ago, back in Classic, if you log into Classic today, you have the strength of sort of insular, self-contained communities where you're seeing the same people over and over again, and there's a lot of upsides that offset the downsides of some of these restrictions. I think in the modern game, really, server increasingly feels like restrictions without as much upside, and so we are systematically working and chipping away at all of those divisions. It just takes time. So I think when we get to a point where things like potentially cross-server guilds down the line and so forth are on the table, I think fully cross-server raids from the start will be automatic. But for now, we want to, while we're working towards it, we want to make sure we're not pulling the rug out from our existing social structures. And so earlier, but not day one.
Pause.
Yep.
I don't have a ton to say on this. I think it's pretty obvious. It's the direction the game is going.
Yeah. Honestly, this is something that I would think this doesn't really affect me. But honestly, when it does start coming out earlier and we're not looking at the Hall of Fame, this actually might affect me.
Yeah.
The quicker I can actually pug into Mythic Raid and I can do that in my free time, I'm fucking with it.
Yeah.
I'm down. I get to a point where it's I've basically geared out through Mythic Plus. I don't care now.
Right.
There's things that I could get, but I don't care enough. But if it's early enough in the season where I'm like, fuck yeah, let's do it, and I kind of miss having some kind of drive to do Mythic content. So I think that could be really cool coming out.
So my only two real thoughts on this, I think what Cheat said, cross faction guilds are probably more important than cross realm guilds.
Oh, definitely.
For sure. 100%. I think eventually we'll get there, but the cross faction thing and seamless cross faction, integration where you don't have to have a community and a guild type thing that just needs to be fixed. Right.
Which, I mean, really you don't. That's solved with guilds.
Yeah.
The only reason that it's just the community thing, it's so different. I think guilds are still very iconic.
Mm-hmm.
A very part of WoW. Because I've heard people talk about oh, guilds don't even matter anymore. What's the difference? Just use the community. I'm like, it's still the word guild is still so integral with that green chat. It's no, the guilds stay.
Yeah. So the one thing I will say, or the two things I'll say first, getting rid of the Hall of Fame and just basically making Mythic cross server from the start might solve the thing that basically triggered Max's question before this about how do you get more buy-in and how do you get more participation in Mythic raiding. Well, if you don't have to worry about
solve it, and I think that makes Ian's point stronger also. When you just have a wider pool and you do get that person in, they're gonna stick with it because they accepted the lockout.
Yeah. And there's just we've seen it already with Mythic Plus, having the cross faction thing. It's so much easier to find groups. There's so many more people participating. I think it's just a no brainer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I honestly hadn't even thought about that, how that affects the previous question, and I think that is the answer.
Yep.
Or at least the best one.
Yeah, it's at least a fix, right? It's something.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say, I do. This may be just me looking at, I don't really like Classic, but I do have fond memories of some stuff. I do miss a little bit identity on a server. And
it definitely still is a thing in Classic.
Yeah,
which is a breath of fresh air to see.
I think in general, being able to LFG cross server is better in almost all ways, but like there is something to be said for like Ian talks about like community building and that like stick it out sense of like I'm playing with these same people. Like you did get that when you were locked to groups on your server.
Yes, the same thing back then too. Just even with dungeons, it's like it just took me 30 minutes to find a dungeon, so I'm sticking it out.
Yeah, right.
You know, you're not gonna leave that shit.
And like obviously no one wants to do that and wait, 30,
Right.
45 for a dungeon, but maybe some sort of fix. Maybe I know people like freak out when the talk of like condensing servers comes up because my server identity that doesn't exist anymore, but like I would
Right,
love just bigger servers that were able to queue themselves, so you still had the short like looking for group times, but you're still just with contained to your server potentially. So
Right.
or just a global server, one global release time, mix NA and EU together, and run some fiber between us and Europe, and fix the ping issues.
Well, that's not even the issue with like time zone is a thing too with the global release.
No,
stuff.
we have to fix that too. The world will just be on one time zone.
Right. Yeah. We'll get it. Yeah.
All right, unpause. Like,
Okay, great. So, and again, just the two more questions basically about raid accessibility. And the main one would be actually talking about something you guys have previously done with cross-faction. I think largely this has been really, really good for the game. Obviously, there's still a few things, like it's a little clunky to invite sometimes cross-faction. And then also there's some situations currently with like raid lockouts. Like if you were to race change previously, like let's say for Skolex, you want to go be Dwarf in your alliance, and that's already fine. Now it's perfectly realistic for you to be able to race change to maybe Blood Elf and still raid with your guild, but it will like brick your mythic lockout. So I think something that can solve this, and something you guys have spoke on before, is basically is there any progress being made to the technical limitation of cross-faction guilds? Is it something maybe mid-expansion or much longer than that, do you think?
There's definitely progress being made. It's something we want to do. It's not really responsible for me to commit to a time frame. I would say I would like us to do it before the next expansion.
Okay.
But it's in the hands of
And
a
that's
lot of engineering.
perfectly fine time
solving,
frame.
and just a lot of these changes are pulling on a thread in code and systems that have been built to work a certain way for 20 years, and realizing like, hey, this is trickier than we expected. It may be easier than we expected. We'll see. But definitely recognize there's some awkwardness.
Yeah, I can definitely see
some
that.
groups have had
Makes
people
sense.
faction change that want to keep raiding together and not being able to share the same guild chat, the same guild repairs, guild bank, etc.
Spaghetti code
gets in the way. A lot of the other stuff you talked about, I think a lot of those are what I would consider bugs. There's a few that we're working on tracking down specifically with cross-faction whispers or invites.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a group with somebody, if you've applied to the group finder group, if you're trying to reply to a message, like all of that should just work. Anytime it fails to work, that's a bug. But the thing we want to make sure is that there's some opt-in connection. You're not just getting a whisper from a random
doesn't, by the way.
cross-faction person that
did you want to pause?
you in the outdoor world or whatever. And then also similarly, I think faction change, that's just something we need to change. Like the fact that it stops your lockout is a vestige of how the system was built, when of course two people of opposite factions couldn't be in the same raid in the same lockout. We just nuked your old one to avoid that collision. We shouldn't be doing that now, but again, that's an example of an old system that needs to be updated.
Pausing real quick, just to I don't really have a whole lot to say except like when you pug and two tanks are in opposite factions, like I still think you can't whisper each other. So like that obviously needs to be fixed, and cross guilds getting fixed and all that is cool. Like I think that's just a kind of not throwaway question, but it's just good to hear that that's on their radar and they're working on fixing it.
Definitely. And one thing that's still so frustrating is not being able to whisper somebody of the opposite faction after you like sign up to their group finder.
Yeah.
It's like I want to fucking like whisper them this. I forgot to add a note or whatever.
Right.
Like, no, you can't. And it's funny, like those people will be like, link your KSM or whatever, and it's like I can't.
Right.
So I can't whisper you.
Can't whisper you. Do you kind of unrelated to this question, but like how degenerate do you think race changing fight to fight is going to be for these top end guilds? Like, oh, you need a bleed removal, switch to dwarf. Oh, you need orc or troll, like mini buff, like switch to orc and troll. Like,
Doing it once is already pretty pricey to do it for the whole guild. I don't think they'd be going back and forth. But what they're gonna do is they're gonna be whatever's best on the last boss.
true. Yeah.
Like they're not gonna go back and forth. Like they don't optimize that hard for all the middle bosses.
Right.
I don't think that'll be a thing, but it is a possibility. So
Yeah.
that
Just
could
some
get
real
expensive, though.
degenerate shit.
Yeah, that is expensive as fuck.
Yeah. Blizzard looking to pull in some more revenue, just make all the top end guilds fucking race change every fight for 3 weeks.
Well, so I think there is a possibility that we will see it as like, oh, we're swapping to this for the penultimate boss, and then swapping back for the last boss. So you might see an extra, swap in there, but
Yeah.
I don't think any more than that.
All right, unpausing.
Sweet. Okay. All right. So this is a big one, and this is again, I've heard your philosophy on this multiple times. The WoW has gone through a very long history of.
I'm gonna have
going
many
back
thoughts
and
on
forth
this.
Between bring the player or the class. So last expansion, playing perfectly optimally, there was about 7 spots in a 20-man raid that were basically required with something that you could not really replace with any other class. This expansion so far, again, taking a few liberties, but even leaving a few out, there's a bit closer to 12. Speaking for a not world first or high level cutting edge team who will probably make it work regardless, but more for the 10 to 15 man AOTC level teams that might not have some very powerful buffs or might have to swap classes and like play something they maybe don't like as much to make themselves more powerful. I understand a lot of people don't need to be fully optimal, but yeah. Basically, can you explain your philosophy around raid buffs and how it's differed from X-Back to X-Back, where some classes were not required and now might be?
Yeah. So okay.
Max is nervous right there at the
That
end
was
of
a
that
long
question.
Yeah, I'll
See him
pause
take
real.
that big deep breath.
I'll pause real quick. I think he's trying to tell Ian that like groups don't bring people because of these decisions you're making, but he's also trying to like walk the line of like, well, only if you're trying to be really optimal and like, but like people do
Right.
that all the time. People only
No,
recruit
it's a
in
community perception thing. It's just like
Yeah.
the meta. It's the same thing everywhere.
Yep.
It's the perception that you need this.
Yep.
You don't need it, but it does feel bad not having it
Yeah.
because it is like you're just missing 5% magic damage.
So
over
I think
all
that's
of
why he
your
was
magic
nervous.
damage in the raid, you know.
Yeah. I think he was trying to like walk that line between like saying like this design is bad because it forces guilds that don't need to make these decisions to think that they need to make these decisions, and then also like trying to still like keep the tone of the interview like, you know, happy and fun and whatnot. But I think that's a good point. Like, and we'll hear from Ian in a second, but like guilds will absolutely do this.
So a lot of what he's getting at too in this question is like something that he's been talking about a lot recently is this is fine, but there's 2 classes that still don't have anything that does that for them,
Yeah.
where they are going to be brought for sure.
Yeah.
And I think he gets to that.
He does, yeah.
But I don't remember.
Well, I think we just watch this all the way to the end because there's quite a bit, and then we can just talk about it all.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, starting.
Question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, okay. So like, I guess, I mean, so some of it is stuff you mentioned that I've talked about in the past, but I think the origins of bring the player, not the class, were like the extreme other end of the spectrum back in late Burning Crusade, where it wasn't just raid buffs, it was a matrix of party buffs. And it was, you know, as people saw in BC raiding, well, you know, you need a rogue in the group with a warrior to give battle shout, the warrior needs Wind Fury or they're bad, and sometimes you'd have somebody who's a good player, plays a class that's theoretically good, but you don't have room for them in your specific raid party matrix, and so they can't contribute. That felt clearly not what we wanted. And we moved away from that steadily. But I think where we're moving back towards is class mattering, making sure that the best raid composition, if you want to be optimal, is one that has representation of all 12, soon to be all 13 classes. And that's, you know, 20-player Mythic raid format supports that. I think that's something that is friendly for pugs as well in a flex raid setting. Like if you're a pug leader, you're trying to recruit the optimal group, get a group together. If you don't have a warlock, you should be looking for a warlock. If you don't have a hunter, you should be looking for a hunter, as opposed to
Poor
which is the
hunters.
meta range spec, this tier,
Mhm.
let me just bring 5 of them and we're good to go. That helps provide social opportunities for the full range of players. Now, that said, we want to make sure that none of these buffs feels too impactful to the point that it's like you can't go without it. It's utterly mandatory at multiple levels of play, not just the top tier level. In that case, we want to look at things like tuning. We want to look at things like alternate buff items that can provide a substitute, or just increasing availability. I think the two most classic ones in this space are, Bloodlust, Battle Res. I think no group at almost any level is going to go without them. The percentage of classes that brings those buffs has decreased naturally over the years. That's something we're looking at changing. So a little scoop for you. I think you'll probably see this in the next beta build, or next alpha build rather. Evokers will bring Bloodlust. So we'll have a 4th Lust class in the mix. We're also looking at adding Battle Res to one more class. Possibly Paladins, likely Paladins, but don't 100%.
I'm gonna pause real quick
Okay.
because it's almost done. But when he says evokers are bringing lust and paladins are bringing battle res, you could see the gears turning in Max's head.
Right.
Like, oh fuck, we have to now think about now we can bring a pally for B res, and we can bring an evoker for lust, and you can see him start thinking about the group comps immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Finish real quick and then we'll get into it.
Yeah. And then for the rest, we want to take a step back and look at the whole ecosystem now that we've explored the space of individual buffs, on the class level. We don't want to close that door and say, no, we're not doing this. But it's absolutely possible that when you take all 38 specs in their totality, there's just too much of this now. And we're too close to the Burning Crusade space, at which point over the next month, we'll want to pull back on some of those.
Okay.
But yeah.
All right. Yeah. So actually, I will have a follow-up.
So, real
go
quick,
ahead. Go ahead.
Super quick gripe. He is talking about, oh yeah, back in the day when it was, oh, we need a rogue in the group with the warrior to get battle shout. It's like, yeah, we're going towards that, hardcore. Just depending on what are the rogue buffs actually looking like. You're going to be bringing rogues, even if it's not for the outlaw variant of their party buff, but you're going to be bringing them for the DR.
Right.
So therefore, you're getting into the vein of, okay, well, we're bringing a rogue, we're bringing a warrior, so we need them in a group together. And if those are in a group together, then we want to put a Wind Fury in with them. And then if that's the case, then what else do we put in this group? And you're getting very close to that. So I think that argument is we've literally had those situations happen in Shadowlands just with the return of Wind Fury.
Yep.
So to say that, oh, way back in the day, this is how it was, dude, that's how it is.
Yeah.
You there's no way you can't see that this is already happening, and you guys are pushing it further, which I think is fine. It's their philosophy shift. I'm cool with it. But to say that it's different, that much different from then, as far as the party versus raid setup, we're there. That's already a thing. It's
Yeah. So
just that first part of that answer, just
so ignoring the fact that, and we're gonna get into it in a second here, of there are still classes missing utility. I was gonna say what Nyark says. Why just get rid of party buffs? Just make them all raid wide. Then you only need to bring
Wind Fury
one.
is kind of crazy if it's just raid wide.
It is, but not every class, the majority of classes don't even use it. It's not good on any healer, really. It's not good on any caster. It's not good on tanks, really. It's good for arms and for
honestly,
the shaman.
Even the outlaw rogue one, that would kind of be insane raid wide, I think. I mean, it depends on its implementation. Obviously, it wouldn't be the 20. It's not even going to be the 20 seconds off everybody's cooldowns like people think it is anyway. It's going to be 5 seconds off people's cooldowns in your party.
Yep.
Because it's going to be split amongst them. But that's not that good. But 5 seconds off everybody in the raids cooldowns every minute. I guess that's actually kind of
It's still not that insane. Like it honestly probably messes with some timings more than it helps, you know?
Right.
Like you got to wait a couple globals for everything to line up. You could make the buff flex depending on group size. You could do a lot of things that could fix the very specific party problem, right?
Yeah, I think there's a couple party buffs that would be insane being raid wide, but not.
Or just like let you select who you want to put the buff on. Like, you know, that could be a solution too, so you don't have to worry about having proper like group makeup. I don't know. I mean, you'd have to make like a whole new UI.
A lot of shit. Yeah.
I'm just saying there are fixes to this problem that could be implemented. The one thing before we get into like the individual utility part that we're going to talk about here is Ian very briefly does mention consumables coming back potentially. And I think that's a good fix for if a couple classes still end up not having something, or you can't put together an optimal group comp and you're missing one of these, even not the non-party, but you're actually missing one of the like raid buffs, that you could just give it with a consumable, even if it's like a somewhat lesser version of it. Like I think that's a good solution as well.
Yeah, I think so. Real quick too. This is already a thing. So I mean, you guys are right. They can totally just every party buff that exists, just make it raid wide and nerf it. If it needs to be nerfed because it's too insane, then nerf it. That's fine. But then add a conditional to it that when you're in a party, you know, you're in a 5-man, it is buffed to its full value.
Right.
That's already a thing with like Divine Hymn. It heals for more when you're in a party instead of a raid.
It's like they already have the scaling for DPS, like after 8 targets does reduce damage.
Yeah, but it's already there for cooldown, like 4 raid wide cooldowns of like it does more when you're in a party setting.
Yeah.
So if there's ever the thing like, oh well, if we nerf it for being raid wide, then it's not really beneficial when you're in a 5-man like Mythic Plus content, but that scaling is already there.
Yeah.
It's already
when you cast Wind Fury after 5 targets, it gets reduced, you know, effectiveness.
Well, then that just feels bad. You just need to nerf it. You just need to nerf it across the board, and it just be raid wide in the nerfed version for everyone. Like, I think that's the only way to having buff for less past X amount of targets. Like that just feels so bad.
All right, let's keep watching the next part here, because this is where it really gets into the like the shittiness of playing Hunter.
Question on that, because that was actually, first of all, that was an amazing answer. Thank you for that. But so when you talk about like a scenario where, okay, if you are trying to play optimally, you maybe will want to have one of every spec. I think there's a couple of polarizing versions of raid utility right now that I kind of want to hear your opinion on. So currently, I think of the, how many classes are there now? Is it 13 with evokers?
Yep.
Okay, with 13 classes, I think 10 have ones where they have either an hour-long raid buff that is basically irreplaceable, or are in some way bringing them to raid. Like for example, warlocks don't have them, but if you've been around, gateways, hellstones, summons, wipe recovery, all those things are extremely powerful, and you need one of those classes. How do you look at abilities like DK's Death Grip, where it's not a class you need to have in the raid every pull, but if there is a raid boss or a dungeon or something that requires grips, that is as important or more important than that. So how do you balance between classes that just have a button that puts them in the raid versus classes that have such strong situational utility where they're needed immensely for small things but not for every boss?
So you're asking us to nerf Death Grip, in other words. No,
that's the opposite of what I'm saying.
No, honestly, carefully, like needed is the thing that shouldn't be something that we're building in encounters, certainly on non-mythic difficulties. Like if having knockbacks, having Death Grip, having a certain tool makes your life a bit easier in normal and heroic, great. And again, like pug leaders, especially, like pug leaders are encouraged to, it's flex raid for a reason. Look for a Death Knight. There's a ton out there who are actively looking for groups. Mm-hmm. Get one in, it'll help you. Philosophically, like we talk about normal versus heroic, I think part of the difference there, like a normal group, normal mode is pugs, but also just really casual friends and family groups that are just there to play with each other they're not looking to bring strangers into their group. They're not necessarily looking to like recruit to get a certain class or re-roll. We want to make sure that at that difficulty, you can succeed regardless. You can succeed with a very suboptimal comp as long as you have the basics covered. At heroic level, like to some extent, the difference there, even if you're not like cutting edge mythic, you still, there's some challenge, there's some coordination. You care about success. You're not going to bring along a person who's doing 50% less damage than everybody else if you're failing to meet a DPS check. And so in that space, bringing in classes that can help you is useful. If it's ever literally impossible, then we're going to probably make mechanical changes to the encounter. We're going to give you more time. We're going to, make a cast interruptible. We'll do something there, so it's like it's not just ridiculously punishing if you don't have that specific class. Honestly, though, like things like Death Grip, we would like more of those because it's so cool. Because it's more than just 5% damage or whatever passive buff. It lets you shape your strategy, and I think lets the player who is the Death Knight, even though they may, resent having to run out and do some utility at the expense of their parse here or there, it lets them feel like they have a special role that's contributing to their group success.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that.
Okay.
Also, just
Yeah,
So-
pause. Sorry. I have a
Good
cat.
question, or really good answer, but I don't think it fully answered the actual question. Like, I think it answered a lot, and it was a good answer, except for the fact that how do you feel about that versus, like, do you consider that them getting a guaranteed raid spot because of their, do you consider that a reason to always
Right.
bring them when you're trying to fill, basically his philosophy that you should have one of every class in a raid comp? But like, that doesn't really count. Like, if there's a fight that doesn't need a Death Knight, there's no reason to bring a Death Knight, like, for sure. Like,
Yeah.
you could just play the fight without any Death Knights, and that is kind of like counter to his philosophy. So I think that's what Max was getting at, is like, how do you feel about that, and do they still need something else that actually puts them in the raid when their utility isn't necessary?
Yeah, and like Ian says that like they would like to add more like that, but like that becomes such a tuning nightmare if you have to design and like a fight encounter nightmare. Like if you have to now start designing fights with all of these different like very specific utilities in mind. Like okay,
Yeah, then you can just, I mean, there's been things, I feel like any fight in recent memory, like having a Death Knight has been awesome, but it's not like mandatory.
there hasn't been one on normal and
So,
heroic.
I mean, I think it is cool. Like, I agree that it's really cool to have that super situational utility that just makes something so easy. And it could be something as little as like literally Earthbind Totem is like that for me on like second boss in Gambit. Like, playing that
Yeah.
fight without just an Earthbind Totem is a big difference.
Well, you look at Rygalon, having that slow is so good
Right.
for the Quasars. And also having a grip on that fight fucks you.
Right.
Because you don't want to be gripping the ads or slappy
I
hands
mean,
the
unless
ads.
you run out and grip it back out.
Sure.
Just using it as pure utility.
Yeah.
Save the day. But
So yeah, I think it's cool. Like grip is cool and has some like super crazy great situational stuff, but like I'm trying to think of the last fight that like really had a hard requirement like that, and it was probably like Blackrock Foundry with Aspect of the Fox. With
right.
what was it, P1 of Black
What I'm
Hand?
getting at, though. We're not even necessarily talking about Death Grip in this question. We're talking about it in the sense, like, how do you feel that lands like in the philosophy of you should want to bring one of everything?
I don't think it does.
So where does that land then? Because that doesn't necessarily puts it in for some fights where it's like, yes, we need a Death Knight on this fight. You don't even if you don't need it, it's like, well, it makes it easier, so we need it.
Right.
But there's nothing else in the Death Knight toolkit that does that. So it's like, how do you feel about this versus that? And so I don't think the question was quite answered. You could look at it a couple different ways though, so I don't really blame Ian for not quite getting there.
Well, I also think too, like, I think there's such a difference between, like, you know, the hour-long raid utility, just straight buff, and then something that's a button that you push in a specific situation. And I think they are okay with, like, okay, you have this cool utility button that does this one really awesome thing in maybe one fight or raid.
Yeah.
And you're just, you know, your groups aren't going to be so picky that they're bringing you and sitting you on a fight to fight basis in your average group. Like,
Right.
if the
But
raid,
and I think shit like that is cool, but it just doesn't achieve the philosophy.
yeah, no, I agree.
I think.
I just don't think they're gonna fix it. Like, you know,
Right.
so
Right.
It's definitely like
All right,
these
going.
DKs are wild. But yeah, I was more kind of along the lines of like implying like I think it's hunters, DKs, and shamans, I believe, that are the only class in the game basically that has situational fight utility instead of just they have something that makes them in all the time. So I was kind of just saying like maybe if you did actually want where like okay you will always have at least one of these, so you have 7 spots now to fill with just what you want. If you're being optimal, obviously you don't have to be. If you're being optimal, and then you have that. But currently there are, I think it's only, you're kind of trending in this direction, so maybe we haven't seen the full vision of it, but like there is still, I think like 2 or 3 classes that don't have something that puts them in the raid all the time.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, we are looking at representation across, just what the actual stats are.
I kind of forgot that he followed up
You
with
want to
this.
have a good idea.
Yeah.
So this-
Which what we were just talking
That's what I
about.
was
Yeah.
getting at.
Elegant, that's
Yeah,
not-
yeah.
It's easy to say, okay, this class has nothing. They get some new passive 3% stat buff. Now everyone
Yeah,
has to.
yeah.
But that feels like a cop out. So it's like, if there's a representation problem that we need to solve, and we're coming up with a good idea, we want to move in that general direction, but not at the expense of elegant design.
I'm gonna stop
Excellent.
real quick. I mean, I guess we're kind of getting towards the end of this, but like he says that we don't just want to give like, you know, a passive bonus, but then they literally did that with Evoker. Like your new class that you just designed, you gave an all the time always on buff. So
What, the mana one?
no. You get
Which one?
they give what is it? Cooldown reduction or whatever on movement. What is they're always I'm
Right,
blanking because I'm on the
No,
spot.
that's an ability,
Hold on.
right?
I will find it.
Oh, no. Yeah. Okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it reduces everybody's movement cooldown by 15%. Yeah, but I don't think that, like, I think that's something new and something that they haven't done before. So I think that's really their thought processes.
I
mean, that
guess.
is something cool and unique that, like, does maybe change one's minor little breakpoint on, like, uh, just situational quality of life, having something 3 seconds earlier when you normally wouldn't. Um, I wouldn't necessarily call that one like a blanket, boring 3% stat cop out, which is what I think he's getting at.
Yeah, I thought, is that what it is? Is that
Yeah,
actually
it
what it
reduces
is?
everybody's movement cooldown. So it would be like roll for monks, like their basic rotational movement
Yeah.
thing. And
I
it's
guess
not
I'm
by
just
a
saying
lot. It reduces their own hover from 35% or 35 seconds to 30 seconds. So it's like it's not a huge
yeah.
amount,
I guess that's true. I'm just saying it's a passive thing that they added when they could have given them, you know. If-
Well, and I don't think he's like shying away from adding passive buffs. He just means like they don't want to add uninspired. Hey, this class gives 3% crit to everybody. Like just something uninspired and
Yeah.
bland.
Yeah.
That's what he's trying to stay
Alright.
away from.
We'll finish up the last little bit
And
here.
Actually, this actually isn't even a question. I just wanted to bring something up on the note of like bringing classes to raids and make sure it's accessible. Along something that's often forgot about when talking about the DK thing we talked about at the beginning of this interview, where it was the video you were watching was not about DKs. It was about melee representation in raids. And I want to say since that video, you guys have actually done a very good job at that. This expansion so far, Sanctum and Sepulcher, as opposed to like the normal comp, you've been able to stack basically as much melee in both of those raids on every boss as much as possible, and that has not happened before.
Much better fight design for melee.
So whatever adjustments you guys made there, it didn't actually trivialize melee, which was my fear for it, and it did make them more accessible. So just thank you for that.
Cool. Thank you. And yeah, kudos to the encounter team. Really, I mean, it's something we talked about as an active goal. Like, how can we get ideal raid representation, melee versus range balance, better representing our actual class mix, and do that without, like you said, just making the fights patchwork for melee. Because that was the traditional way back in the day of like, all right, these mechanics just don't target melee. Cool, they can just stand there and punch the boss for 5 minutes, but that's not a good experience for them either.
Yeah. And then just one more last thing before we move on to Mythic Plus. So you did mention something about, if you need to, you would potentially add them back. But just to specifically ask so if you feel like it's hard enough to get certain things in the game, you guys are not opposed to potentially bringing back the scrolls that existed in BFA, or potentially maybe not buffing Lust Drums back to what they are, because you just added another class that brings it, right?
But I mean, I think we're open to it. I think part of the challenge there is also, when you think about where the scrolls are used, they're not just a raid consumable. They become, a mandatory consumable for every dungeon situation, where by definition you're not going to have class representation because you can't. And then it also starts to turn into like, well, wait, so the thing that I bring as a warrior, as a druid, whatever, is like a 2% better version of this buff, where people don't have to spend gold on a consumable. Like, that just makes their contribution feel less cool. So ideally, we would want to find, a middle ground, whether maybe that's reducing the baseline power or otherwise tuning, so that it just still feels like, cool, we have this class, this is a benefit that we have, and the difference between having it and not isn't, something that you can't overcome otherwise.
Okay. And just one more note that it just popped up to me. This expansion in Shadowlands, as opposed to
people
before,
don't care about their raid buffs though. That doesn't make that's not a fun contribution. Like, they don't care if the scroll brings it, because the reason that they're playing it is either, oh, hey, we need this thing, and I like playing Shadow Priest, like this gets me able to play Shadow Priest or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, people don't care about the button that they have to push every hour.
I was gonna say, how many times
care if it's impactful.
How many times these people just
don't
forget to
care.
push it in a group? Like,
Yeah, that's a terrible argument for bringing scrolls back. Like,
halfway through the dungeon, I'm like, priest fort.
No. Yeah, bring scrolls back, and honestly, we don't care about the raid buff situation at all. We'll take it. Like, that makes everything feel better.
Yep.
But whatever.
Highly agree.
And even if we don't bring scrolls back, it's whatever. But that is a terrible argument for it.
Yeah. Yeah, like, oh, the warrior won't want to play warrior anymore because shout can be replaced with a scroll.
Like, oh, my contribution adding battle shout doesn't feel as good. Said nobody.
Said literally no warrior in the existence of warrior.
People don't care about that.
The only time people cared was like paladin seals, like in like classic. Like that was the only, like that's when
like a personal thing, even.
Right.
More of gameplay loop.
All right, hitting play.
You actually you have consumables you use at like the beginning of a dungeon or beginning of a raid fight that is actually in a much higher number than you did previously. So you have like the armor kits, you have the sharpening stones, the oils, that kind of stuff. Do you guys see that
oil me up
into Dragonflight?
That's a good question. I think we've probably gone a bit too far there, and I think as we're nailing down, just finalizing professions for Dragonflight, want to take a step back and see what the sum total of that experience is. I think a lot of those examples that you gave were things that we did to make blacksmiths and leatherworkers, frankly, feel more relevant, feel like they had something that, other than the legendary crafting templates, they could sell that was part of the economy. Dragonflight is solving that problem on 5 other levels. So, a world where you need to apply 5 or 6 things, it makes each one of them less meaningful, and also just the general economic burden of like doing runs, doing the content, probably gets to be higher than we want it to be.
Okay. So that's it for Raid. I just have a few more questions about Mythic Plus.
Sure.
So the Mythic Plus system in Dragonflight, kind of getting a sneak peek of it in Season 4. So I think it'll actually, probably be a lot better now that you've had a run at retuning some old raids, which has been really nice. The only thing that I could kind of think of as a potential downside is that what happens if, in Season 1, you run into one of your new Dragonflight dungeons that is just extremely good. It is like the key that people want to run, not because it's easy to time. It's just like, this key is so very
I wish you would have said
fun.
banger.
A lot of people have different opinions of these.
You're right.
it may sadden Mythic Plus players that they have an amazing dungeon and they don't get to play it for a long time. So basically, what I'm asking is, what's the balance of good versus new? And if anything, you might not be able to speak on this because it's kind of in the future, but like, do you have any plans for season 3 or 4 of Mythic Plus? Is at that point you've kind of shown what you'll do in season 1 and 2, right? You'll have 4 Dragonflight and 4 returning, maybe to bring back some old favorites.
Yes, I think we definitely have room to revisit, maybe tweak
Real
or
quick,
update, or
pause.
just
Pause.
So this is already a thing. Like I watched Dratnos and Tettles do a thing, and Tettles is already like, yeah, I mean, the dungeons are cool, but or they were talking about this. He's like, yeah, 2 of my favorite dungeons after testing, like they're not even going to be in the pool
Yeah.
in the first season. This is like really unfortunate because like I'm kind of excited to play these 2 dungeons because these are my 2 favorite dungeons of the 8, and they're not even in the pool where I just don't get to play them. So just imagine week 1, we do all our mythic zeros and we just find those dungeons that we fuck with. Like,
Yeah.
we're pumped. And it's like, but I'm not going to get to play them in Mythic Plus in actual content that I'm going to be playing. And it's like, well, this sucks.
Right, for the
Like,
next 3 to 4 months until
yeah.
the next season.
I just think that that's dumb.
Yeah,
It's
there is some more that he gets into, and we can we'll touch on it here in a second.
revisit as they
Playing.
were if everyone loves them a dungeon later on in the season. I think season 2 is almost certainly going to be the other 4 Dragonflight dungeons plus 4 other legacy ones. But beyond that, I think one thing the structure does is also gives more room for us to potentially add all new dungeons over the course of an expansion. Something we would like to get back to doing more of. I think back in Legion, when we last did this, one of the quick challenges that we ran into was integrating a brand new dungeon into a pool of dungeons that the community had already mastered. Like when Cathedral Mythic Plus rolled out,
Oh, this
like
is such a good point.
That was a super dead key for a long time, even more
Seat
so
as
with
well.
Seat of the Triumvirate.
Yeah.
Yep. And like it wasn't actually like the challenges, it wasn't they were in some cases they were actually harder, but like beyond that, it wasn't that they were that much harder. It's that you were comparing a dungeon the community had 1 week of knowledge of to a dungeon they had been running for over a year, but treating them equally in terms of rewards, in terms of what challenge they were supposed to offer. When we have all new pools, that's not an issue anymore. So I think as we look towards the later seasons, if there's new dungeons introduced, that actually naturally goes there. We definitely can revisit any favorites from the first 8 while continuing to rotate through cool legacy dungeons.
Excellent. That is a perfect answer. And then
Right,
also
pausing.
just a
I don't know how much faith I have in them to introduce enough new dungeons that are like good and playable if they can't even get the first 8 right. Like if
I'm not so sure about that because like I'm not really that worried about the 8 new Dragonflight dungeons because that's to be expected. Like basically this whole time I've talked about this, it's like I'm okay with season 1 being a little rough of like a couple weeks of iteration, whatever, to fix this stuff. I'm just not doing that 100% from scratch every single season. Like season 1, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like I'm cool with that. It's gonna happen regardless. But just every season, it's gonna get fucking old.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But I don't know. I think that they. I mean, when I look back, like I look back super fondly on like End Time and shit. What were the other ones? There was End Time that came out in Kata with Mirozond,
Oh yeah, that was a good dungeon.
and there was the other one. But then like Wrath, there was Pit of Sauron, and like all of those expansions pretty much up until Mythic Plus came out, they were releasing new dungeons
Yeah.
throughout and they were usually bangers. So to hear that like maybe this is why they stopped is because of the difficulties stem from Seat and Cathedral in the Mythic Plus landscape.
Yeah.
I think that they can do that.
Cheat, I'm glad the the second best part of the stream is my cat. That's good to hear. Uh, and the first being Max's dogs. So I guess I just need to play Max content at all times going forward. So here's my thoughts on that. And like, I think that if it's a big promise for Ian to make, saying that, okay, well, the reason that we haven't been introducing new dungeons is because of Mythic Plus, and this system is going to now allow us to release new dungeons. Like, the expectation then is that like we're getting new dungeons every season then.
That's a fair point, yeah. Like honestly, with that statement, I would expect at least 3 to 4 new dungeons over the course of the expansion. Yeah.
You know, like, not that he said that, but that's the implication that,
yeah, no,
you know,
it is.
And also like the thing with Seat and Cathedral, like I really don't think they were bad dungeons, but if Blizzard doesn't see them as good, like what's the quality level of just them making a good new dungeon then? Like what?
No, I think this point is a banger. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with this point, because it's not that they don't think they're good, it's that the community
doesn't want to do them.
And it's not even that. It's the first time they do them. This is this is way much harder, or way harder than the ones I already know and have mastered. Versus this shit, like I don't want to put in the time to master this.
Yeah,
and it's like this is harder now.
Well,
I don't think that actually exists though. Now with like the score system and the way people push Mythic Plus now, I don't think that exists as much.
No, it was
because like you're going to do the dungeon and try to master it so that you can like do it at a decent level.
I was gonna say, because the whole reason it sucked doing Seat and Cathedral is because like I can just go run Maw.
Right. Yeah.
In like 10 minutes and get my same gear
there
and
was
my same.
Absolutely no reason to have score. There was no. It wasn't even in game. It was a third-party site, and it was strictly used for easy weekly 15s or pushing higher, but there was no reason or drive to push higher.
Yeah.
It was, you're just going to do the quickest weekly 15s that you can. It's going to be Maw of Souls or like farming artifact power, right?
Yeah, right. And
same thing, you're going to do the quickest.
To just to touch on what Cheat's saying, like where they designed them to be harder, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? It's, towards the end of the expansion, we've played with all the new tools and we're at a certain power level. Like, I guess I would kind of expect them to be harder or more complex. And then like the Mechagon and Tazavesh things being like mega dungeons is like a whole separate, issue. Like those are designed to be, mega dungeons. And then they always just kind of mess up the tuning when they split them up for whatever reason, when they then introduce them into the Mythic Plus pool. But I mean, if they're going to stick to this and like moving these 8 first Dragonflight dungeons out of the Mythic Plus pool, and that allows them to have the bandwidth to add a multitude of new dungeons, like that alone for me would, like, this expansion would be up there with like best expansions as long as the new dungeons are good, because like it'd be the most like refreshed content that we would ever have gotten in an expansion. Like it would be the freshest feeling.
So also one thing about that, Jesus, I just dropped my fucking seat.
I heard it click.
Yeah, I have my, when you're just resting your foot on like the rolly part of your chair.
Uh-huh.
And so I had my heel up and my heel hit it. Anyway.
It would have been better if you fell over.
So the reason that bringing things over to Mythic Plus kind of changes the tuning is, I think, like, different things are going to interact with the same percentage increased number than other things. Like, it just depends on the way abilities work. So that's how you end up with like overtuned shit, is like this ability and the way it works interacts with the percent increase from key level to key level differently. So I mean, that's always going to happen when you try to dub something over to Mythic Plus. Like, you have to buffer nerf baselines to make them make sense with how it scales.
For sure. So. All right, hitting play.
Question about gear. So this gets brought up a lot, but I just kind of want to maybe phrase it in a little bit different way. So with Mythic Plus becoming more of an endgame avenue for people, is there a potential to add higher level loot acquisition for people who are doing top world level keys specifically? So like obviously rating and PvP both get functionally higher eye level, but a lot of people exclusively Mythic Plus. Basically, is there a Mythic Plus key level that exists where it is kind of the same thing as killing maybe the last two bosses on Mythic, even though obviously you don't have to, find 20 people to raid with, and then one is spammable for loot, and one of them is a weekly lockout, all of that included. Just have you guys had any more thoughts on that?
I mean, I think there is a key level that exists. It's definitely a different key level for Lower Karazhan than Workshop, but that's one of the challenges too.
Okay.
This spammability of it definitely is a factor. That's something we've grappled with when it comes to Mythic Plus loot since its introduction back in Legion. Because of how varied dungeon pools are, because of just the social factors of if someone's running a dungeon on a Saturday, we don't want people feeling like, well, I'm already locked for the week, or I've already maxed out on my loot for the week, so I don't want to run it with you. That's led us to every dungeon run gives you some loot, but of course, balancing that against weekly throttled systems like, just raids and PvP means that if it's too rewarding, we just completely killed raiding. And I would argue that one of the problems for not mythic guilds so much, but normal and heroic guilds right now, is the tension between raid rewards and mythic plus rewards. If you're in a group progressing through heroic over the course of a season, but half of your raid is running 15s outside of raid time, you don't really need that raid loot anymore. And that increasingly causes division within the group, even between the people who are doing mythic plus and people who aren't. None of that is great.
Yep.
So anyway, all of that said, the direction I think we'd like to move in, but I don't have specific changes to announce, is on the one hand actually trying to, between tuning and rewards, bring that baseline down a little bit, or at least bring the baseline challenge up a little bit, so that there's more of more parity between raid, dungeon, PvP rewards in that space. But at the same time, find ways to let Mythic Plus players reach the top of the mountain. Like whether it's, I don't know whether there's some level that you clear in your great vaults that lets you get mythic end boss quality loot or whatever else. We'd like to make them truly equal in that sense, but there's some problems to solve along the way.
Yeah, definitely. There's also, I think this season kind of showcased what can
Sorry,
happen
the only
to
problem
heroic-
with that is the only problem with that is that there has to be some kind of cutoff, because even mythic raiders, right? Like there is a varying number, or there's only X number of pieces that you can get at 311. So it's like there has to be some kind of cutoff for a system like that for Mythic Plus. Otherwise, Mythic Plus becomes the
best way.
Yeah, you can fully kit out 311 from your vault if you're clearing this level. So then it puts it above Mythic rating.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that there probably is a key level where you could increase the rewards, or what do you think about like more cosmetics or unlockables or different achievements? Like, does it have to be power level, or could they just start giving like cosmetic rewards?
It does need to be some kind of power level, and it's because of something along the lines of, well, I don't want to raid, but I want to push high-end Mythic Plus, and at a certain point, I need to raid to be able to do that because of just how the last last two or three end bosses
311
work
gear
out with their loot.
Right.
So,
I was more specifically that like there's got to be some sort of way to.
There has to be something, but to your point, I think that there could. Like, I was really upset about apparently there not being like a 2500 achievement. I think that there should be an achievement for like every 500 Mythic Plus rating past KSM, and it should be another different mount or a title or this or that.
I was gonna say, like, I am all for like long term or even high end obtainable things that like there's a chance I would never get. Like, I think that is cool. Like that carrot on the stick type stuff, I think should exist to some extent. Whether it be high score can give like different coloration on armor or different like weapon effects or something along those lines, like challenge mode rewards from back in MOP, like some sort of visual that you can only get for pushing this high key level, right? Maybe if it's even higher than
challenge mode sets would be like awesome
Yeah.
for something like that. It's like you've got like the heritage armor and all the challenge mode sets. Like they make some really cool shit.
Because
just make the challenge mode set. I don't know if this was the case before, but just make it the mythic appearance from whatever current season's raid. I don't know if that is what the challenge modes were.
I don't remember that. The only one that I ever I actually remember is the pole arm, because like everybody uses it. But I guess more my point is that like we're already doing mythic plus keys above the reward level without any sort of reward at all, except just the score push. Like I think that even if we didn't get what we want with like the ability to get some higher item level gear because it would let us push farther, like I think just having a reason, like, okay, you're all 304'd out. You can't get any more 304. You're all bis. Why am I still doing high keys? Why am I, there's no incentive. Well, if there's some transmogs and stuff tied to pushing your score above the reward level, I think that's just an overall positive.
Yeah, I think stuff like that would definitely be cool.
Yeah. All right, hitting play.
Great difficulty by having Mythic Plus available for like you uncapped Valor, for example, right? So if you just went hard enough and you farmed literally +2s and enough Valor, like anyone can do them, you can get full 298 gear and you will not want any single drop out of Heroic basically, except for the last boss. So there's a level there of balancing to where like baseline Mythic Plus. Okay, I haven't thought about like that before. Thank you.
But at the high end, like I think there's absolutely every bit as much skill that goes into pushing really, really high keys. We should be rewarding that equally. We just have to find a way to do it.
Cool. All right. Well, that's actually we blazed through basically all the main stuff I wanted to talk about. I do have a few more questions about like class trees and dragon riding.
Sure.
So with how fun and successful dragon riding, for the few of us who've been able to actually try it yet, hopefully soon a lot more people get it in their hands. It is unbelievable. I think it like fully transcends flying. In fact, it's so good that I feel like just flying normally just feels bad because of how good the system is. Are there any thoughts or plans in the future to allow dragon riding in the open world, potentially some race content in old zones, stuff like that?
That's certainly one of those things we started talking about pretty quickly.
I just lost you. Hold on, I'm pausing. Okay, now you're back.
Okay.
I lost your cam for a second, but
I DC'd.
We're good. We're back.
Okay, let's see, where are you at?
I am at 2958 dragon riding.
All right.
Good.
Cool.
All right. Playing.
Yep.
Came in. I think we built the system focused on Dragon Isles so that we really didn't have as many of the guardrails in designing it that we might have had if we were building it from day one as an evergreen game-wide system. A challenge here is also, not the specific mounts, the dragon ride we built to support dragon riding. We want to be very mindful of preserving players' investment and just the usefulness of the hundreds of mounts that many people have collected that they've spent years farming up. If suddenly those mounts are consigned to the dust heap because they can't do all the cool dragon riding stuff, that feels like a problem. All that said, when we introduce any one of these features, our hope is that it's awesome enough that people don't want to say goodbye to it, that we want to carry it forward, for the rest of the game's future. And so far, this is looking to be landing in that space. So we're very happy about that. Recognize that when Dragonflight is behind us, when we're leaving the Dragon Isles, people are not going to feel great about going back to their old, floating at a static speed through the sky mounts. So we want to have
that old shit.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
The old shitty mount.
Back to the old shit.
I'm gonna pause real quick. I don't I mean, obviously I haven't had my hands on it yet. You do have beta.
Oh, dude, you don't want to go back. It's like old flying is garbage after you dragonfly, so it's definitely a good point.
So it is that good then? It's gonna be like we want all flying to be
so fucking fun.
Yeah.
Well, it's not even necessarily all flying, but just some kind of evergreen system where you just put the races in every zone or like in some old world zones, because the races are so fucking fun.
I
Like,
want to race in not Stranglethorn.
Stranglethorn too would be
Stranglethorn
cool.
would be cool, but where's the Salt Flats? Like south of
Oh yeah,
Razorfen.
Thousand Needles.
Thousand Needles. Like I want to race on the actual
Yeah.
racetrack.
Right.
Like I think that'd be really cool.
Come down from one, you're just going along the like pillars, and then you come down through the racetrack, go back up.
Yep.
Something, yeah, that would be cool.
Pre-flood, when it was like still classic.
So, like, the dragon riding is more fun, like for the races. From getting point A to point B, there's times when it can be kind of frustrating, as opposed to just regular flying. Like, oh, I need to go up. Let me just press spacebar and just go up. Whereas sometimes it's like, shit, I don't have enough vigor to like keep making my guy flap up, and I run out of shit.
Yeah.
But like that's at a very base level. So like once it's all fleshed out, it's just more fun and engaging than regular flying. But I think at the very least, adding dragon riding races throughout the old world and as an evergreen system going forward, like the races are a lot of fun.
I'm
it's
excited to get my
extra
hands
shit
on
to
it.
do out in the world too.
Right.
you know?
Right.
It's like,
A reason to be out there and seeing old zones, and I mean
as opposed
that's cool.
to like shitty world quests, it's something actually fun to be out in the world doing that you would want to do.
Right. Well, just tie some world quests to the races and let us go nuts.
And like the thing with the races too is like there's advanced versions of them, and you could just like fuck one up and you want to like beat your time, so you could sit there at the same race and do it fucking 10 times over and burn an hour.
Mythic Plus,
like you're having fun,
rating for races. Put it in the game. Raider.io race rating.
Right. Post your times and shit.
Yeah. Race speedrun videos. I'm already on top of the compilations. They're gonna happen.
Yep.
All right, hit and play.
Let's see. I have two other ones. I'm trying to like kind of combine them maybe to come up with something that is a little better. So, so far the class trees have been excellent. The best ones give you things you haven't had before. They give you choice. Being able, maybe not even adding things you're getting, but necessarily just dropping things you don't maybe need for a specific encounter to give you a passive or another thing that will make you more powerful in what you're doing. This has been achieved through most of the specs in the game, but the feedback has been a little varied. So we've had, some specs get feedback every Friday for this entire patch so far with great changes. There's been other classes that didn't have posts for a month, but then just got this massive dump of information that was clearly being worked on the whole time. With excellent changes, speaking about DK specifically. And then some other classes have had less updates. Basically, just asking, like, can there be a more standardized level of feedback between all the classes? And how has that been going for you guys?
Druids and priests, we hear you. We're gonna have information soon.
This is old, obviously.
Apologies for the silence.
Right,
I know,
right.
You deserve better, and you rightly expect better. Ideally, yes, we would have had, just more even-handed communication across the board. The challenge is, it's, I know billion-dollar company and all, but at the end of the day, it's also a number of humans who can all just fit in one room together, who are handling both the class design side of it and the community communication side of it. And life happens, that results in, gaps along the way. Sometimes one developer is working on a couple of classes and has one done, but they need to get the other one done because understandably players of that class are impatient, but that means in turn that they're less focused on the first one for now and are going to get back to it. And so it's stuff like that. I know sometimes it can be helpful just to hear from us that, we don't have anything right now, we're working on it, we're going to have news for you in a couple of weeks, as opposed to just radio silence. And I think we all need to collectively work to get better at ever having the radio silence situation going on when people are just waiting for news. Excellent.
Okay, and I think I have time for one more question. So first of all, that's excellent. And I don't even know if I need to enter with a question. The question isn't even that good. I just want to point out that you guys have the right idea with class trees. The ones being done at their best, and you've seen over time, the ones that were a bit more problematic have obviously been a deep amount of collaboration there, and they have seen the things that have worked in other trees and moved on to others. So far, I think the fact that some of them at their very best show an unbelievable form of content, I think all of us are just really happy to see it, and just hope that all the classes kind of end up turning around with the same, because I know it's going to be a long road, right? Because you're just now, it seems with posts, you're getting into the tuning section, right? where like now that you've added a bunch of new capstones, you're going to need to make sure that they all kind of make sense. They have some of them weren't capstone nodes before. They need to really compete with each other. So you guys ready to just talk about that process?
Yeah, tuning and iteration, right? I mean, that's going to mean replacing some talents, redesigning some things that just aren't working. But we obviously needed to get the broad foundations out there. Looking forward to raid testing, Mythic Plus, endgames, seeing people actually using these builds in different situations, and moving beyond theory crafting to playing with them. And that's the only thing that's ahead of us. And frankly, that's actually a little bit of a relief. Like at this point in Shadowlands, we still had 4 different systems to implement. It was like, cool, we got these things done. Now let's finish making conduits and Torghast powers. Here, okay, we have our first batch of
Shadowlands.
talent trees done. 100% of the team's time is going to be focused on listening, responding, iterating, and then tuning.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
Pause
Thank
real
you
quick.
so much for.
So this is, for everybody watching, this is obviously a little old. Most classes now have had updates, but there's definitely still some classes that need a little bit of love. There's still Rogue specifically still has some 3-point nodes for
Druid
some
too.
reason. Druid, like we're in beta now, and there's still a bunch of stuff that's either bugged or tagged as NYI. Like we're getting probably pretty close to release in like a little over a month, or I guess 2 months ish.
Yeah, but I don't think people understand. Like, I still think that that is so much less work. Like, when they have actual class devs that are just fully focused on the class and what's going in there, I think that that's a lot less work than everything else
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Obviously,
that we've had in the past.
you're
So I think the timing
100%.
just feels like it's like, oh, we're getting close, but I think the timing is still way more lenient than it generally would be.
You're 100% right, but like,
It still makes us nervous, though.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just I hope we start getting some of these classes to iterate on more, and like the adjustments that are being talked about, and like get rid of all the 3-point nodes. Just don't introduce anymore, because the more times they iterate, like I feel like that's less time spent tuning, and like a lot of this stuff being good, like in theory, that we look at these trees and like, oh, look at all this choice and blah blah blah. That's like all hinging that the tuning is good, right? Like at least good
Right,
enough.
and the tuning doesn't need to be nailed right away. I think just making sure everything at least works
Yeah.
is more important, and tuning is, as long as they get on it, because obviously we're a month into Dragonflight, things are still undertuned when they shouldn't be. That's a problem. But like, say Dragonflight comes out, some things are still busted on the tuning side, but we're getting like 9.2.5 levels of like weekly, hey, this changed and this, all of these knobs that are being turned, then it's okay, right?
Yeah.
Like if we have a week or two of just they're changing stuff left and right, it ends up working, I think. I think why that didn't work in Shadowlands 2 is like legendary crafting and like so much heavy investment that like they can't tune.
Yeah.
Because but we're not locked into anything. They can tune whatever they want anytime they want.
Yeah, and that's
hopefully
true.
that makes it better. Hopefully that makes it not as nerve-wracking.
For sure. And like to your point, tuning doesn't have to be nailed, but it does have to be like in the ballpark. Like,
right.
Because otherwise all these good choices are going to just be, oh, I just run this one build because just the tuning is so good for this singular build, even though my shaman tree, it looks like I can build like 4 different things, but in reality, like it's just tuned poorly.
So what I'm getting at is I'm not so worried about the tuning. I'm actually I'm still worried about the same thing, but like they need to get to a point where they're not iterating anymore. That way, that final iteration has time to be tested.
That's what I'm saying. Like we're 2 months away.
Yeah, that is the real part. Is like, it doesn't matter if you have enough time to like get what you think is going to be the final iteration. There's still probably going to be more after you think it's done. Like, you really need to leave time to test.
Yep.
Everything, and
that's what I'm nervous about.
And that's where the timer is really getting close, just factoring that in.
Yep. All right. We're on our last little segment here. Hitting play.
For your time,
I have one super quick question for you. Just wanted to seed this as a question for you from the community.
Okay.
How do you guys
Max
feel
is so
about
nervous.
simultaneous normal, heroic, mythic release as a thing in, let's say, hypothetical future?
His mind is blown.
I think, for me personally, I think, okay, so I haven't had any time to think about this, but something that I think is an issue is like one thing you guys have done some things to mitigate in the past is you've like had to reduce what crazy things we would do during heroic when like mythic first comes out. But the reality is that's because we have an entire week to do.
Max just looks
If
so
Mythic is out,
scared.
that really
He
solves
does.
a lot of the decision making. You'd be doing a lot of things when mythic is out, but I mean that is a massive source of information. I don't know. That's very overwhelming. I would need to figure that out.
Yeah,
but
no.
chat
And to
is
be clear, I'm super not, I'm not genuinely not announcing
No.
anything there.
Yeah.
We're just trying to figure out, I mean, there's holidays coming up, there's stuff going on. We want to think through how our raid rollout is going to work for the start of Dragonflight, and community feedback always helps.
I think it'd be. I'm not positive, but I think it would be worth a shot, especially with like the potential timing. So I think it's so much at once, but I'm almost positive that it's a good thing. But I would need to like actually sit down and actually think about it. So thank you for that. That was very cool. And thank you so much for the answers. That was deeply insightful.
All right, I'm
I love
pausing.
hearing you talk about WoW.
So I thought that interview was great. We'll get into this little end part here in a second, I think. But like, I thought this was awesome. Finally having Ian sit down with Max, because he doesn't really sit down with like top end raiders very often.
Right.
He sits down with more like the community people and content creators. So I loved this whole interview.
Yeah, same. I think Ian knew what he was getting into, like going with a top end guy, and I think that maybe affected a lot of his answers. Because I think Max did a really good job of like pulling it back a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think there was some friction there, but I think they both did a really good job.
I also, I don't know if people know this. I mean, most of the people who probably hang out and watch this know, but like Ian was a top end raider at one point before he started working for Blizzard. So like he probably better than most of us even understands like the amount of work. And it's such a different scene from when he was raiding, but just like, I think he gets it to an extent.
Yeah,
I don't think he
but
always
it's still like a lot of it is pretty standard across the board when you're just pushing at the high end.
Yeah. So like, I think he's made some bad decisions, obviously. But I think we're finally getting to a point, just based on everything that we've seen, that like this expansion is shaping up to be, I think, pretty good.
Yeah, I agree.
So I guess we can just talk about this little last piece real quick. So before we talk about like the simultaneous rollout, he does kind of confirm the holiday season launch, because he mentions that as specifically a reason that they want to do this, because, holidays are coming up and we don't want people having to basically work too much through the holidays. So I think that pretty much locks us in for like an early November release.
Well, definitely, because I mean, it's you kind of figure that anyway.
Yeah. So what do you think about simultaneous release? Doesn't affect us at all, but
yeah, it doesn't affect us at all. So honestly, it's a thing where I don't really care.
yeah,
It doesn't affect my gameplay loop in
Yeah.
any way. In a way, if that's the case, then they would also not need to gate first week Mythic Plus gear acquisition.
yeah.
As a matter of fact, I would be pissed if they did. If they're already, if we're getting simultaneous release, then what's the point? You're literally just neutering the content that I want to do. So, I mean, I'd be cool with that. I think it just gives me more of like the season 4 vibe of like go.
Yeah.
Let's get this shit done.
I think it'd be cool that just like everything drops all at once, all the content's here and accessible, and the game is your sandbox. Like, go do what content you want to do at the pace you want to do it. So I think in general, I think it's probably a good idea. I think for the race, I think it's going to be interesting, because like, I think it turns into like, who has the balls to like stay in heroic splits the longest before even killing a singular mythic boss. Like, so I think it definitely changes the race and makes that decision making. Obviously, it's going to be uncharted territory for all these guys.
Yeah, I think it makes the race worse.
Yeah, I think it makes it a lot longer, potentially.
Not even longer. Really. Well, it would make it at least the week longer.
A week longer, because normally they'd spend that week doing heroic splits before it opened.
Right, definitely.
Yeah.
But I mean, not necessarily, because it would make it literally a week shorter in the, if it was like an Emerald Nightmare. Say it's Emerald Nightmare, it would literally make it a week shorter, because those guys are gonna go into
right.
and just dookie on that shit in the first week. So,
and I don't think we're getting
really
another
depends,
Sepulcher difficulty raid. Like,
right. I just hope they don't turn the dial too far.
Yeah.
Although I even like Emerald Nightmare, I had a blast in that. It was easy, but it was still difficult enough, and I had a lot of fun.
It was a cool raid. Like, difficulty aside, it was just a cool raid.
I had a good time then. So, but it was easy for sure. So
yeah.
It's like,
but yeah, that was the interview. I really liked this. Hopefully you guys liked listening to us break all this down. Hopefully I get a beta code soon, or a beta invite soon. That would be awesome, because I want to.
You've been checking your launcher, right?
Yeah. Oh, every day.
Like, just on the here, let me find it.
You talking about?
It's
here?
like the small text, like Shop World Warcraft forums, patch notes.
Yeah, I don't have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And keep checking that spot for sure.
Yeah.
Like, it's not some big button.
I am.
Hey, beta here.
I am. Believe me.
Very passionate about
There's
it.
been a lot of beta keys going out.
Yeah, no, I do not have it, Nyrix. I am a non-beta boy. I've been opted in since the minute I could have opted in. So, but yeah, that's gonna do it, I think, for us. Thanks everybody for hanging out. As always, it'll probably take me way too long to get this up onto YouTube, but I will eventually get it up onto YouTube, considering I now have 2 podcasts that I'm putting up. But check out the YouTube if you guys haven't. I'll post it in the normal spots. Any last words? Hacked.
Nope, all good here.
Sweet. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Peace out.